Chapter 16, Reptile Guard. "The prisoner has confessed?" Nancy eagerly asked the police chief. "Not completely," the officer replied, "but he did tell us his name. It's Jake Suggs." "And he was living at the castle?" "Yes." Chief Burke went on to say that the prisoner had suddenly called one of the guards and cried out, "I'm not going to be responsible for a murder." Nancy's eyes widened in wonder, as did those of Bess and George. "Murder?" Nancy repeated. "That's what he said," Chief Burke continued. "Then this man Suggs said, 'There's a man hidden in the cellar of the castle. He's sick. If you don't get him out of there, he'll die.'" "Did you get him out?" Bess asked breathlessly. The officer nodded. "And now here's the big surprise. The prisoner in the cellar was Mr. Wheeler." The girls were dumbfounded. Finally, Nancy found her voice to say, "Thank goodness! How is he?" Chief Burke said that Mr. Wheeler had been taken to the hospital and was now under heavy guard. He had been fed and well cared for by Suggs, but was too weak to escape. "Did you learn anything else from either Mr. Wheeler or Suggs?" Nancy queried. "Not a thing. Mr. Wheeler evidently was put to sleep before he was taken from the hospital and knew nothing more until he awakened in a dark room in the castle cellar. No one had questioned him, and except for the care Suggs gave him, the retired lawyer was left alone. Suggs merely said some people brought Mr. Wheeler to the castle and paid him to take care of the lawyer." "Who were they?" Nancy asked. "I wish I knew," said Chief Burke. Then the officer's stern expression relaxed, and he smiled slightly. "I thought you might be interested in Suggs' story about the bats," he said. "He let them remain there to frighten away any intruders." Bess giggled. "They did that all right," she said, hunching her shoulders reminiscently in disgust. The chief turned to Nancy. "Miss Detective, have you any idea who brought Mr. Wheeler to the castle?" "I'm afraid not, but I'd certainly like to find them." "I'll bet Nancy will find them," George spoke up. Nancy now said that she thought Suggs knew much more than he was telling. "For instance, before Mr. Wheeler was kidnapped, George and I went to the castle and were warned away when we were about to enter. Furthermore, we saw a car leaving there that same day. Also, through binoculars I used on the hill, I saw Suggs signaling from the tower. The day Suggs was captured, my friend Ned Nickerson was in the cellar searching and didn't see Mr. Wheeler." "That's not surprising," said the officer. "Mr. Wheeler was in a room with a well-camouflaged door." He went on to say that the police were still searching for the kidnappers, of course, but had to admit that they did not have a single lead, and Suggs refused to give names. "And I'm afraid we have no word on your car, Miss Drew." Nancy had a sudden idea. She knew the chief would think it far-fetched, since he had no notion she connected the mystery of Mr. Wheeler's abduction with the mystery about which he knew nothing, that of Joanie Horton's kidnapping. Aloud she said, "If there's a gang around here hiding things at the castle, maybe my convertible is there." Even Bess and George were surprised to hear this. George reminded Nancy that not only had the girls and boys searched the castle, but also that the police had. "But they didn't search the grounds," Nancy countered. "That's true," Chief Burke admitted. Nancy asked him if he could spare any officers to go out to the castle with the girls and look around. He agreed and said he would send Sergeant Fossley and Detective Humphrey with them. The men were called in and introduced. Then they led the girls outside to a police car. The group set off for the castle. When they reached it, Nancy was glad to find the drawbridge still down. She had half expected that when Suggs' friends failed to see him signaling, They would have come to find out why. The first thing they would do would be to remove the stones and wires holding down the drawbridge and hope to avoid a further search of their secret meeting place by the police. What had happened? Were they afraid to return? The driver parked on the narrow roadway beside the wall. Then the 3 girls and 2 police officers began a thorough and systematic search of the grounds. They had concluded there were plenty of places in which a person might hide a car. Tall grass and weeds grew everywhere. The searchers fanned out around the sides and rear of the castle. Presently George called, "I see flattened grass. 2 narrow rows of it. They could be from automobile tires." Nancy and Bess ran to her side. There was no mistaking the tracks, although the weeds and grass were struggling to an upright position again. Excited, the girls followed the trail. Presently they reached a slightly depressed area at the end of which was a huge mound of grass. Embedded into the hill was an enormous wooden door. "Your car could be in there," Bess called over her shoulder to Nancy. Bess was in the lead, but suddenly she stopped and shrieked, "Ugh! A snake! A monstrous snake!" Nancy and George looked at the ground. In front of the door, sunning itself on some rocks, was a 5-foot snake. At the sound of the girl's approach, the reptile raised its head. The forked tongue shot out from its mouth. "Car or no car, I'm not staying," said Bess, who started to retreat. George, unafraid, looked around for a rock to throw near the snake and scare it away. "He's just guarding the place," she said with a chuckle. "I can't see what's so funny about that," her cousin retorted, but she stopped running. By this time, George had found a small rock and heaved it toward the reptile. It landed within a few inches of the smooth body. At once, the snake slithered off through the grass. The police, having heard the shouts and Bess's scream, had come from the other side of the castle on a run. By the time they caught up to the girls, Nancy was pulling at the old door. It proved to be too heavy for her to move. At once, Sergeant Fossley and Detective Humphrey stepped forward and gave it a yank. As the huge door opened, Nancy gave a cry of glee. "My car!" she cried. The young sleuth ran inside the large opening, which she guessed had been a root cellar, and climbed behind the wheel of her convertible. There was no key in the ignition lock, but she had hers in her purse. Quickly, she inserted it into the lock, and a second later had started the motor. "It runs!" she exclaimed, smiling broadly. The 2 officers looked on in amazement. Then Sergeant Fossley said, "You are a clever young sleuth. No one else thought of looking on this island for your car." There was a short discussion about the thieves who had taken it. Everyone doubted that they planned to use it or sell it. They reached the conclusion that the car had been taken to keep Nancy from sleuthing in the neighborhood. "Apparently you have a reputation all the way up here in Deep River," said Detective Humphrey. "Well, now that you have your car, I guess you don't need us any longer. We'd better get back, Fossley." The 2 men hurried off to their own car. They waited, however, to see that Nancy's convertible was still running all right. Then they crossed the drawbridge and sped off. "Let's look around here some more," Nancy suggested. "With luck, maybe we'll find some clues to the identity of Suggs' pals." "Not on your life," Bess retorted. Nancy drew, "Don't forget your promise to Ned." Nancy gave a sigh of resignation. She had just driven onto the drawbridge when the girls heard creaking, groaning sounds in the wood beneath them. The next second, the bridge began to lift. Bess screamed, "Nancy, the bridge is opening! We'll be thrown off!" End of chapter 16.